Coming in to give the last talk of the presentation the day after a wonderful party ends. I only wish I could have extended my stay last night in the celebrations and dialogue and everything else. So Lynn and I chose to make this final presentation. It'll be somewhat of a conversation, although we do have prepared comments, and we wanted to highlight those issues that we think would be important for your consideration as you take your thing and move it into the whole world of things that really will propel your career in the directions that you would like to see happen. So we both stand before you as digital enthusiasts. As all of you know, or should know by now, and it's no surprise, we are not coders. No one said and stood up and said Lynn or Chris is standing in the way of getting the code.
Yeah, that's right. We never do that.
But we are enthusiastic and enthusiasts for all that you're doing. And we've been part of this digital world, and we'll take you back through memory lane, as typewriters transformed into ones with memory, and mainframe computers went to PCs, from 80-column key punch cards to Excel files to databases to the present world that all of you are currently creating. So we approach our own careers with a very open mind as to all of the possibilities, and all of those possibilities for us are set in practical considerations. So all of you were presented and posed with 4 questions that we're using to guide this discussion. Where are you working? What's your position? What are your tenure requirements or job expectations? We're not in any way assuming all of you are within the academy or want to be. And where do you want to be in your future? And that's maybe a more existential question. So your replies, we did a spreadsheet. We looked at all of the various themes and ideas that all of you had presented to us, but they centered around 3 different things: publishing in the digital world, P&T in the digital world, or job expectations in that digital world, and then a broad theme of collaboration in that digital world. One of the things that guides our thoughts on this is that as a scholar, regardless of where you work or what your title is, your main responsibility is creating new knowledge and making it available to other audiences, whatever those audiences may be. But I really feel strongly, and I think Lynn would agree, that that's the core reason why you went on for your PhDs, why you're in the academy, why you're working in museums, why you're working for the government. It is that knowledge base that you want to share with many, many other people. And at the core of that responsibility is storytelling. That is, writing stories in a form appropriate to your audiences. And if any of you have read the beautiful writing of Terry Tempest Williams, she captures this with story is an affirmation of our ties to one another. This is, again, part of community building. So building things, building communities are forms of publishing, and we don't want you to forget that in any way. But so is Twitter, databases, code, high-impact peer-reviewed journal articles, monographs, edited volumes, museum exhibits, and the myriad of other ways that knowledge is presented in tangible forms for various audiences. Good writing is critical in all of this. Good code is as well, and having a good, accurate code makes a difference. But good writing is critical as a way of expressing that knowledge, and reading about good writing is a pathway to successful communication. At last year's talk, I mentioned some of these books, but they're well worth mentioning once again and adding some more to it. Stanley Fish's book, How to Write a Sentence and How to Read One, it really gets at that level of sentence structure and understanding how a beautiful sentence is constructed so that you can communicate in a much more broadly nuanced and beautiful way so that people listen and hear.
And it was written before it became quite so obnoxious.
Yeah, Yeah, Liv Dixon. You're putting Stanley Fish in there, but his book, I highly recommend the book. The other book is by Helen Sword, Stylish Academic Writing. And this particular book is also beautifully written, but it's easy to read, it's short, but it dispels all of those myths we have about academic writing, because she actually analyzes academic writing and finds ways of saying that you don't have to be so third person. You can actually use the word I or we. How journal articles actually are constructed to really have an impact. So she looks at scholarly writing and then talks about ways that we may be carrying around all that baggage of how you were told what to write and how to write in a jargonistic way, if that was indeed how you've been taught, which I think is hopefully not the current state of affairs. Steve Pine's book on Voice and Vision, which is a guide to writing history, but history is storytelling and a good way of thinking about this, and other serious nonfiction. And that is what we're talking about here, is serious writing by serious scholars. So we're not trivializing, we're not making less of our academic knowledge, but we're really trying to show how critical that is for moving conversation, moving dialogue, moving knowledge forward in our understanding, in this particular case, of our past. Bill Germano is certainly delightful, and this is the third edition of his book, getting it published, a guide for scholars and anyone else, again, interested, anyone else serious about serious books. And his information ranges from taking a dissertation and moving it forward to doing much more scholarly types of work, but in a way that you understand the publishing ecosystem.
And his name doesn't appear on that slide, but
yes.
it's Germano.
Yeah, William Germano, yes. And he's been in the publishing world as well as the academic world. He also blogs for the Chronicle, so you may see some of his work there. Wendy Belcher, her name is not up here on this, but Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks, a guide to academic publishing success. If you think I have no time, you do. And it may be in smaller bits and pieces. She starts out a plan, this is almost like, your training in 12 weeks, how you get fit. This is in 12 weeks, how you turn something you've already written, and all of you will have a white paper. If you want to turn that into a journal article and 3 months from now, know where you want to submit it, she'll step you through and the plans to be able to do it. I used this in a class that I taught. We only had 10 weeks in the class, so it was a bit compressed, but students they came in with an article and then stepped through it to the published version. And then Brian Fagan's book, Bringing It Back to Archaeology, Writing Archaeology, and again, note the subtitle, Telling Stories About the Past. So all of these various books give you a sense of how to beautifully, in written form, present all of the work you've been doing this past year. Now, Brian Fagan talks about writing, and many other authors do, as it's slogging, it's hard work, it requires constant revision, and I can't overemphasize that, and lots of self-discipline. All very true. And as he goes into his discussion of the digital, which he fully admits in the book that that's not his arena, but he's obviously intrigued by it. I would imagine he'd be a digital enthusiast as well. But this whole concept of going from linear narratives to non-linear ones, to changing authorships, and to collaboration, which comes into the authorship arena. So digital projects must, and we heard this on the first day from Neha, that answer the question why. Why are you doing this? Why are you coding? Why are you coding what you're coding? And really trying to understand how does that coding and what you're doing and the projects you're creating reify your research, your data, the collections, because however you structure that, you're already allowing only certain ways of access into your data for future research or current research. So those initial decisions are in many ways structuring what you may be able to do with that in the future. Anthropology and archaeology have reached these larger audiences. Many of you may know the current online platform through Wintergren called Sapiens.
And if you don't, you should
Yes.
link to it. I mean, it's free too.
It's run out of DMNS right now.
Right.
So.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's right.
That's
Yeah.
right, with Chip.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chip Colwell. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, anyway, sorry.
So there are digital platforms available that are open that you could write for a bigger and broader audience. And they give advice to what they want to see. And it's, you know, have a hook. They don't use the word hook, but the theme, that major message, that argument. Have a story, create the scene for what your anthropological research. Archaeology Magazine as well offers similar advice about building stories out of your finds, out of your physical evidence, out of that data, out of the objects, and then the narratives derived from those particular finds.
I wonder if I should do this now.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, before we talk specifically about your MSUDAI projects, it occurred to me, I don't know why I hadn't thought of this before, but back in 1988, I published a digital project, which is right here. And this digital project was done from a database, the first database for the Macintosh computer called Helix, and my husband happened to have designed it. And I used Helix regularly at shows. I helped sell it, and the way we sold it was people would just come up and we would design databases on the fly, because you could do it because it was all with tiles, and it was really very simple. It was an elegant program. So I designed several archaeological databases, but one of them was for projectile points. And so this volume, little as it may be, because it was designed for the public, is actually from the database. So although there's an introduction and things like that, it was all done from the database with the particular variables and so on. So every page, of course, is the same because the database, spit it out for each point. And then I have a metric rule along the side so people can lay their points down, figure out how long, wide, etc. And all the photos are exact size. So there's no worry about, I don't know what that means if this is this scale or things like that. We'll pass this around, but this is out of print now. And the Milwaukee Public Museum, who published this, was supposed to put this online, and I think it just kind of dropped off as they went into major financial crisis. But we'll pass it around, and it is something I should put up because it's still useful, and a lot of people use it. Mm-hmm.
You can still get it on Amazon.
Can you really?
Wow.
Because I thought they had called me and sold me the last few copies for $1 each.
Because I see people selling used ones online or something.
Ah.
There was an entry.
Ah, great. So actually, this is by myself and Sandy Osborne, who was my PhD student and who kept saying, oh, wait, we really need to do this. And then after we committed to it and we pulled the points and took all the pictures, she decided she didn't want to do it anymore. But anyway, so that's what this is. So we can pass that around. And so my point in showing you that, first of all, it's an early kind of digital project. And at that point, there was no option of putting it on the web. That just wasn't an option. It was, we had to publish it in some way. But I raise it so that you can think about, there are all different kinds of ways you can take parts of what you've done. And if publication is important to you in some fashion, or different kinds of publications are important, you can do that. You just have to think about it in a very different, non-traditional kind of way. So that's the reason for showing you that. And then, so we then looked at your projects. And so we're talking about whatever that thing is that you've created. Since you all haven't created exactly the same thing, whatever your thing is. And then how to transform it. And the idea is you can transform it in many different ways. You can revise it, you can do whatever. Go ahead.
And I think that transformation is something for you to think about, how to basically think about publishing the thing, think about publishing and transforming it, or writing about the thing is another way of making sure that people know what you're doing. And certainly your white papers.
Right, and that's what we sort of want to remind you. You're all writing a white paper. That white paper can be a first draft of a publication.
And I think you should think about it that way, without being prescriptive of writing
Right.
that way. But it really, make your writing count in as many ways as possible. So this is a little piece on how do you even think about if you want to have your values, which this whole institute has been on open access, of making things available. There are many, many different platforms for being able to do so, and there are many, many costs associated with that. So.
Oh, and I just wanted to say that, realize that what Christine and I are doing, everything we're talking about isn't theoretical. We're just talking about practicalities. We are being very pragmatic and saying, look, you might not be able to change the whole system right now, but here's what you can do within the current system to make it so that you'll get to the point that you can change the system. So we're not trying to, so our advice is very pragmatic advice. Go ahead.
So Ithaca did a study on the cost of publishing monographs, and they looked at different size.
And it's not
presses.
misspelled, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's and should be all caps. I should have had Ithaca as all caps there, and I didn't. But it's a sobering range of costs that right now university presses pay to publish monographs, and this is their basic table, and the 1, 2, 3, 4 are just different size presses. But just to give you a sense, you're looking at publishing a scholarly monograph for a university press costs maybe just under $20,000 up to almost under $100,000, depending on the press, depending on the actual monograph, all sorts of factors being considered there. But there are lots of costs embedded in publishing that may not be apparent to you. So
And I
yes.
just so that I hope you all know that Christine was director of the University of Arizona Press. So you could actually ask her a question and she would know the answer, as opposed to some of us who would make it up.
Maybe you're government, maybe or maybe not, but I can answer. So when you decide to go, oops,
You went too far.
I did.
There you go.
Okay. When you decide to put your values into practice, and if you want to have an open access monograph, many of the standard publishing places that you would go to do this, they would be charging, this is why they may charge you $20,000 to have an open access monograph, because of the costs that are known to already exist within traditional university press publishing. So just being aware that following your values is really critical. If you want to have this scholarly work available, there may also be financial burdens on you, depending on how you go about doing it, and again, depending on what your needs may be. So these are just some other costs for some, and again, these are primarily, not all, but commercial places that are now having platforms for open access journal or manuscript publishing.
You should realize that some institutions, and certainly not all by any means, like this institution doesn't, some institutions do have funds for contributing to open access publishing. And you should find that out. Ethan and I frequently talk about the fact that it's really a pain in the butt that MSU does not. But
social sciences.
social sciences.
And letters got
Right. Yeah. So certain parts of but the university as a whole does not have a policy or a pot of money, where many institutions do. And then the other piece, which we're about to talk about, is the fact that if someone tells you that you have to pay X number of dollars to make it open access, negotiate. if you don't have that money or don't have access to money. You should always negotiate. Don't just say, oh God, I can't afford that, bye. Talk to them.
And do you want to talk about open
Right.
archaeology?
Well, Open Archaeology is peer-reviewed, relatively new peer-reviewed electronic-only journal. And Terry talked yesterday about the fact that he and I had this article in a issue. And they are very open to negotiation. And they wanted, I can't remember what they actually wanted for each article, but I basically said, well, Campus Archaeology can pay $500. And they said, great. And so that was what we paid. But most of the authors paid nothing. So in this particular instance, some places are much more flexible than others.
And one of the key things with Lynn is talking about with negotiation, that is true probably for your whole career, but
No.
also when you're working in any realm of publishing. You can go in with what's important to you, are you matching it with the right publisher, and creating that dialogue. So that is done on many, many different levels. And I always found that it was particularly good when I worked with an author just to ask them, what's important to you?
Mm-hmm.
Because some authors would say, I want a hardcover book. Others would say, I want to have a paperback. Or I really want my royalties, whatever they may be, to go to a particular entity and not to come to me. There's a lot, or I want copyright to be held in my name or into some other person's name. So there are points of negotiation. Sometimes there are simply deal breakers in
Yeah.
contracts.
And if you've heard that a particular publisher is very problematic or has very restrictive licenses or whatever, maybe don't go to them. But they're not the only publisher, and that's the point. But you have to really think about it, but don't go in and say, well, there's no way I can afford it, so forget it. See what you can negotiate. And at certain points in your career, you may feel you don't have that luxury, and that's fine. But really consider it carefully, consider what's important to you, and be willing, and negotiate.
Back in 2008, the Mellon Foundation was really trying to help the publication for authors for their first monograph, and that was a real difficult time for many new scholars coming up. And so they created a program of trying to find ways for publishers to work together to reduce costs, to go forward in different ways of publishing. At that time, this was 2008, Darren Pratt at University Press of Colorado created ADME and brought in the University of Arizona Press, among others, for Archaeology of the Americas, which was a digital monograph initiative. We had received a one-year planning grant at that point, and at that point then I was leaving University Press Publishing to direct a program within the world of public history at Arizona State University in scholarly publishing, training students who wanted to go into publishing. So I left at that particular juncture. But as I've kept up with this, is where they ended up after that planning grant year was the realization at that time they couldn't effectively, in terms of financial constraints, put together something among those presses for publishing digital monographs. But other things have
I'm so
happened.
sorry.
That's okay. It'll come back up.
Yeah, it'll return.
And just this past summer, Mellon announced that they are funding Muse Open with Johns Hopkins, and it's a new open access platform for OA monographs. So I don't know more than the press release and how this will be structured, but something to keep a lookout and to keep in touch with what is happening with that and what is going on. And maybe even Kathleen will be able to have some comments on that when we talk. So
Okay.
Lynn is going to talk about
Promotion and tenure and things like that. In some museums, by the way, I'm just saying this, and obviously if you work in a museum, you know this. In some museums, they have an equivalent process of tenure. And sometimes it's called tenure and sometimes it's not. But the idea is that no matter what kind of institution you work for, or organization, even if you're working for yourself, frankly, there are certain expectations and certain things that need to happen for you to keep going. But I'm specifically here talking about university promotion and tenure and what's required. The first thing you should do is, if you don't have a job or you're going to switch jobs, when you're negotiating, when you're visiting, whatever you're doing at that institution, find out what their criteria are. And if they don't have criteria, you have a problem. And make sure you get things in writing and what the criteria happen to be. And right now, the SAA has a task force on promotion and tenure guidelines, which I happen to be a member of the task force. And a lot of it was actually prompted by digital concerns. But it also concerns about public archaeology, about field work, data preparation, all of those data publishing, all of those kinds of things that we're all doing now and we are not getting credit for. And it's not so much that you have to get credit for every single thing you do, but you are evaluated. And if you're only evaluated on this little piece and you're doing all of this, there's a disconnect and you don't always come out on top. So the guidelines, I've gotten permission to give you the sort of summary because they're in draft form. And a lot of it is really just people going ahead and stating, and making sure they know what the rules are, and then they have their own responsibilities. And that's the other thing. I was chair here for 10 years, and I was chair at another institution for about 3 or 4 years. And one of the things I often see is that, number one, people don't always know what the criteria are. Number two, they're doing something unusual, but yet they're not doing anything to prepare the institution for the fact that it's not a standard kind of promotion and tenure. And you know what? I mean, I hate to say it, and it's kind of sad, but nobody's going to look out for you except you. It's just a fact. People will help you, they'll do all these things, but it's your responsibility. But at the same time, institutions have responsibilities. So you really need to make sure you know what those are. What do they expect? If there's something that really disturbs you about it, talk it through, explain, and especially if it's part of your appointment. So if 50% of your appointment is doing public archaeology and there's nothing in their criteria that credits public archaeology, that's a problem. If you're a digital archaeologist and sort of hired as doing that, and there's nothing in the criteria that addresses that, that's a problem and needs to be negotiated. But create a timeline, ask about things like open access costs. They do want journal articles and monographs. And one of the reasons, I always like to put it this way, institutions as entities are not very bright. And they really don't know about each discipline. And every department gets really nervous. If we tenure this person, we're saying this person is a good scholar. But we don't really know that. And so, on our own, because we don't have that expertise. And that's why peer review becomes so important. But there are lots of ways to do peer review. And that's the thing to remember. It's not just one way. And I'll get back to that in a second. And then, you want to make sure that you make your digital projects count. All right, so I've said this, individuals have an obligation. And the other thing I would say, and make sure you know what your institution's criteria are. The other thing is make sure you have an advocate. You need an advocate. If whatever institution you're going into doesn't have some sort of program for advocates, then you need to try to change that. But you need somebody to advocate for you, because what happens is, especially in tenure, as you go through the process, you are further and further pushed away. When I went up for tenure, I didn't have the opportunity, once I submitted my materials, to do anything. All I could do, it's like watching a train wreck, You could just watch it, but there's nothing you can do to stop it or influence it or anything else. But your advocate can. So make sure you have an advocate. So the SAA task force is, the draft is completed. I have to say it is super long, I think too long, and focuses on different kinds of work that archaeologists do, what kind of energy is involved, and for the institution, you know, they need peer-reviewed products. I will say that the people on the task force really are across a broad range. There are a number of digital people. There are people who, there's a person who is a provost. There is a person who's dean. You know, there's a wide variety of people. And some people, we had this problem here. I don't know if any of you have this problem, but we had a problem here of a young member of our faculty ranking digital journals lower than hard copy journals. So they're both peer-reviewed, they're both journals and so on. And so I pointed out, because I'm editor of the archaeology, the archaeological papers of the AAA, I pointed out that as of 2017, all 23 AAA journals are going to be digital only. So did that mean that Kiva ranks higher than American Anthropologist? You know, it just doesn't, it makes no sense. And so that should be fairly easy to get around now. I don't think it's as much of a problem. But but this person was ranking people lower because it was not hard copy. And it wasn't a full professor either that was doing it. Anyway, what I would like is if you have any comments on this, and there's a lot of words. I tried to cut it down, but I wanted to put forward what they were saying. If you have any comments on it or things you're concerned about, please tell me, because I have resisted sending my comments in until after this institute, because I thought it would be great if I could get some input from some of you. Candidate responsibilities. When you're being hired, seek clarification on assessment. Make sure that if you're doing a collaborative project, make sure you're very clear about what your contribution to the project is. These are your responsibilities. Talk to the department a lot about your efforts, your collaborators, what kinds of things you're doing, why this is essential, and so on. And this is something that's very, very important. Don't just wait for them to come to you. You go to them. In many departments now, there's a yearly discussion. And do that, but do other things as well. So I'll tell you one of the problems I have. And I run campus, and it's not a problem for me personally because I'm a full professor, but none of the money I get for campus archaeology counts. Doesn't count for me, my evaluation, because it's internal money. Now, nobody's ever gotten a line item in the university budget, except for me, but that doesn't count. So I get over $100,000 a year from the university, and none of it counts as me bringing any money in. Only if I get a grant. And so there are things like that you have to figure out ways around. In my case, it doesn't hurt me any, and so it's fine. But it's not fine because it makes me irritated. But it does make, I mean, these are things you need to think about and talk through. You're going to be judged on significance and impact of your work, whether it's public, whether it's digital, whatever it is. And the best way, as I said before, for a university to do this is peer review. If you are concerned, I would argue that you should push for specific reviewers or specific kind of peer reviewers to evaluate your work in writing for your department. And this becomes very important because a lot of times they don't have a clue who to ask. And so they might ask somebody to review you that, you know, really doesn't understand what you're doing. And so you really have to be an advocate for yourself as well, and then talk to your advocate about it as well. And then another point on the candidate, this is the last candidate responsibility, is that most archaeological work involves issues of curation and sustainability. So we're destroying things, and so stewardship of items and records and databases is critical if you're going to be ethical. digital scholarship has different, but certainly also sustainability needs. And we have to demonstrate that we've attended to this and that we also get some credit for the amount of energy involved in doing this. Now, the department responsibilities go on for several pages. So the candidate and the institution have to agree on expectations. Now, this is in here, and I have to say that because of lawsuits and various other things, most institutions these days, at least in North America, are pretty good about this, but you still find people who say, I don't have a clue what I'm supposed to do for tenure. Now, I know we have a rule here that not only does every person who doesn't have tenure have to get in writing the criteria, but it's also the case that you're evaluated every year, and your letter from your chair is supposed to say exactly what you have to do in order to get tenure. And that's true at a lot of places. Archaeologists who have particular kinds of assignments have to make sure, the department has to make sure that that's part of the evaluation process. A long time ago, when I was in Wisconsin, the business school there got sued. And the net result of this was that I was put in as an observer at all business school tenure and promotion meetings and stuff. And I was to report to the vice chancellor on what they were doing. And I sat through this one tenure evaluation of a group of people going up for tenure. And it shocked me because they were going through this one person, and I'm like, oh yeah, man, this guy really hasn't done that much. And compared to these other people, he really isn't as good. And then I looked at his materials, which they'd given me as well. 50% of his appointment was something different. And they were evaluating him as though 100% of his appointment was regular business school. And so I raised my hand and said that, and they all booed me and stuff. But the point is that they were just tacitly ignoring 50% of this guy's appointment. And so that's why an advocate's important. It's also why you have to, this is something you really have to be very clear with the institution about. And so impact of scholarship, and this is another piece that's in there. These are all part of the draft things, SAA task force. Impact of scholarship has to be assessed on via a variety of measures, not just through quantitative assessments of citations. Although the task force says that of the materials available now, Google Scholar is probably the best for archaeological work. It's certainly not the only one, and other altmetrics might capture things that Google Scholar doesn't, but that in effect what we're doing is saying, don't just put it all on one metric, because that's what a lot of places are doing because it's easier. And again, they want someone else to do that evaluation. And then again, the department should consider and decide whether and in what form any of the following potentially impactful forms of scholarship will be considered as contributing. So how about things like doing permit applications, proposals, fieldwork data, final reports, public presentations, databases archived and published, all of those sorts of things. Are they going to be counted? And if so, how? And in what ways? What we're saying is that has to be something that is explicitly addressed. And then, owing to the collaborative nature of archaeology, departments have to be sure to recognize and assess individual efforts in multi-authored reports. Science, colleges of natural science do this all the time. But College of Social Science and Humanities tend to not really do this very well. And then finally, because field archaeology, not finally, I actually have another page. Because field archaeology involves the destruction of non-renewable deposits, databases, records, and so on are critical. So digital scholarship has obviously concerns for curation and sustainability, and both the candidate and the institution have to demonstrate they've attended to this, and this is where I would disagree with our report. It doesn't say that you somehow get credit for doing that. In other words, some recognition of doing it. It says you need to do it, but it doesn't go that next step. And then this is the last page of the responsibilities. Archaeological products take a variety of forms. And so we're telling departments that they have to view them and evaluate them in that native form. And why we say this is I can't tell you how many departments make people print things out. You know, so you design a website and they make you print it out, right? And it's crazy because it doesn't look like anything then, you know, it just doesn't do anything. The candidate must be appraised by the department and institution of how they're going to weight all of these different things in evaluation. And evaluation of funding has to really take into account how competitive funding is these days. I was telling some people, I just recently served on an NEH panel in a different program of NEH, and we didn't realize till we got there and had done all the work that they were only funding not even 10% of the proposals that, you know, were being evaluated. So engagement via community and public archaeology is increasingly valued and important. And again, it's something you have to agree on if you're going to make a strong tenure dossier. And then the last one is we don't know how digital scholarship is going to be evaluated for tenure and promotion. But where the task force is saying that both candidates and departments have to proactively address how that evaluation will happen. And what I would say to you is if you know that, and this is the advice I've been giving for years, if you know that you are doing something that's a little bit out of the box, that is different than what most people in your institution are doing, then you have an obligation to start framing that case and to start really making sure that your department in particular, but also your institution, understands the pieces. I think it's okay to be somewhat outside the box on these things, but you have to make sure there's something there to frame it. And I'll tell you a personal story. When I went up for tenure, apparently one of the people they asked for a letter was James B. Griffin. And Jimmy Griffin was quite a character, and he wrote a one-sentence evaluation, and it was basically something like, I only saw it once, but it was something like, Lynn Goldstein has worked in this area and done work that no one else has done, da-da-da-da-da, and I will take every opportunity to argue with her about it. And so people on the university level tenure committee, people in the department thought it was hilarious, but people in the university committee felt that he was saying I was horrible. So my tenure case ended in a tie, and a tie is you don't get tenure. So my advocate said, when he found out that what the problem was Griffin's letter, he had the committee call Griffin on the phone. And Griffin basically swore and screamed at them and told them they were idiots and they should just go ahead and give me tenure, because didn't they understand what a one-sentence letter meant? And so that's how I got tenure. But you need the advocate, and you need people to be able to make the cases, and so you never, you really don't know what happened. Now, I don't know how this tenure task force is going to play out. And I don't know, I know we're producing a report in a couple of weeks. But if there are things you're especially concerned about, or things that you think really should be in here, and again, I couldn't give you the whole report, please let me know, because this week is really the chance to try to address this. And so at least they're moving towards something. All right, so then we're moving on to our next topic. Whoops, what happened?
Was it the unpluggy thing?
I don't know. We're all plugged. It's here, but
They come out of the laptop, maybe?
just
A tenuous connection there.
yeah. Well, there we go. There we go.
Okay. No one move. I'm not going to touch
Don't breathe.
anything. So our last topic of the conversation and things that you had talked about centered around collaboration. And part of it was, how do you create a digital humanities center? How do I go to work for one? How do I find that pathway? And so we're couching that in the world of focusing on collaboration. And I should mention that actually yesterday Brian, where's Brian?
I think you just walked out.
He just walked out. So Brian really presented, by talking about LEADER, all the things that one might consider in terms of forming a center. So I think he covered that nicely, and we had actually taken out that detail. One comment that Lynn said is that you don't want to think about creating a center before you have tenure in that arena. So we're in that particular world. So back in 2008, quite some time ago in the digital world, the Council on Library and Information Resources did a study on a survey of digital humanities centers. And what their main conclusion was at that point in time is that these digital humanities centers, they were silos. And then there were individuals who worked in the silos. So there wasn't anything that was anything different except the type of work that may have been conducted, but still a very closed, non-collaborative system. Now, since that time, there's just been quite a proliferation of digital humanities centers, digital archaeology centers, however they may be constructed, and that's been quite expansive. And it's also been a lot in small liberal arts institutions. And Rebecca Frost Davis actually has a post on listing all of those centers, so you could see how they are cutting across many institutions, both large and small, and her focus was on the smaller ones. Lynn and I both find, and we talked about this, with a lot of digital centers within the university structure, while universities recognize how important this is at this time in research and scholarship, the people that they're bringing in to run these centers, they're not according them tenure track status. And that, to me, and I think maybe
it's a red flag.
It's they're supporting it, but they're a little bit nervous about it, so they don't want it to be at that same level of equivalency. And that's something I think, if at all possible, when you're moving into digital centers, seeing where you can have a home department that could have that tenure track part of it, because that is important within the academy and signaling that this is an important position that you're holding. Now, on a more positive side, a lot of these centers, really, I think what has been interesting to me, they've been hubs for transdisciplinary research, and where they're breaking out of that silo type of thinking and really looking at, when I think of transdisciplinary studies, that's different than, it's taking disciplines as they're structured now and really creating new disciplines or new ways. It's not just connecting people in partnerships and people in their silos in terms of departments and scholarly knowledge connecting, but it's that connection that forges something completely unknown before. So neurobiology, where you'd have biology and studies in neuroscience coming together to create a field of neurobiology. That today we just take it as, but that type of really transformative work. Patricia Levy writes a lot about that, not so much in terms of digital centers, but talks about the essentials of transdisciplinary research. A new book that is not yet out, coming out by Routledge, is Transdisciplinary Research and Practice for Sustainability Outcomes. And so I'm going to be really interested in seeing what this book
It's got
is all
every
about.
keyword.
In that title. We have outcome sustainability. So that should be, I think, fairly interesting to take a look at. And it's an edited volume, so it'll cross-cut, hopefully, a lot of other places. Another place for publishing to think about in terms of collaborations is collaborative anthropologies. This is a traditional peer-reviewed journal, but it really focuses on that core of authorship, and authorship with researchers and the people that they're working with as joint partners, and creating those collaborations across disciplines within the field of anthropology. So in particularly if you're working among indigenous communities, this is a really a good journal and a forum for being able to do that.
And we're getting towards the end of what we were going to say, but I did want to go back to something that I didn't say. One of the other responsibilities you have, no matter where you're working, what you're doing, is you actually have to promote your own work. You really do. And the advice I've given for 40 years is basically, I used to tell people to send a reprint of an article, but send a link, send a digital copy, send a PDF, whatever. But think about people in the field that you consider, people that either you look up to, not necessarily peers, but peers too, but beyond that, and send them a copy of whatever you've done. And say, I just published this and I'm not sure you'll see it, and I thought you might like to look at it. And here's what happens, because I can tell you because I do it myself. What happens is they get it and go, oh, that's really nice, and then they set it aside to read, and then of course they forget about it. But then they get a letter asking to write a letter of evaluation for you when you go up for promotion. And they go, oh, that's that person who sent me that damn article. And they go back and read the article and then cite it. And so, because they feel guilty. And so, and because it's relevant and all of those things. But it does happen all the time. So you really have to be out there promoting it. You can promote it on social media. You can promote it in many different ways. And as problematic as academia edu is, and I tend to not post anything there, but as problematic as it is, there have been a number of studies that show that it increases your citation rate by 60%. And so, you have to consider what you do about that. And then actually, Sean just changed my life yesterday by showing me how I can get DOIs for all these articles that I've published that don't have DOIs, or things in edited volumes. And so now I can add all those DOIs on my CV, and magically they're going to count. Because that's what a lot of the metrics do, is they look for the DOI. And so if I publish something in an edited volume that was, published 10 years ago, it tends to not show up often. It'll show up on Google, but it doesn't often show up on other things. But now, and I just noticed I got proofs the other day for an article in an edited volume, and each article had a DOI. But anyway, so that's another thing. But don't forget to do that. Okay, then we go back to the...
And Sean, are you going to make available how everyone here can
do that? No, it's a secret.
It's a secret. Only one has access to it.
The Figshare worked.
Okay, well, all I did was I just, GitHub has a little tutorial about how to connect the GitHub repository to Zenodo DOI. And I just futzed my way through that.
And I tried to do that, but the problem is it doesn't work for an article.
Yeah, it's not assigning them at the level of.
Right, it's assigning it for the folder.
So if you have a folder with a single.
Yeah, but that seems a little. So then I tried Figshare, and Figshare I was able to do it.
Yeah, but Zenodo itself has lots of documentation about getting all sorts of different things into it for DOI, so I've only just started in the last day or so playing with that, so.
Zenodo with a Z?
Yeah.
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 It makes a difference when you type.
Yeah. You say it differently too. But yeah, I did get Figshare to work for an individual article.
So just in conclusion, as you're going out and moving forward from your coding to your projects, to the public unveiling of them, and to the research that you can do now, which was not possible a year ago before you started this project, think about all the different things you've learned throughout the past year and the variety of ways that you can turn those publications into new ways of reaching other audiences that then also help your whole future trajectory of your career. So be open with your knowledge in a form that helps you create this future world that you want to become a part of. And with that, we conclude, but without, I want to end finally with saying that while you cannot come to me and ask for coding advice, or you can.
Well, you can.
You can, but you will not get a response that you really want to hear. I really am open to hearing more about where you're at with your publications, when you're submitting proposals, if you're going a traditional route or not, with any editing questions you may have, with any relationships that you're going to be working with various publishers and contracts that you may be looking at, and then also when you're applying for jobs. And I work, as many of you know, in the museum world at the Amarand Museum Art Gallery and Research Center. And as I worked through my career in university press publishing as well, and in my teaching at Arizona State University, I really spent a lot of time critiquing people's applications for jobs and helping them find the pathway that really connected what their knowledge is with what the job description actually was, and really help further people thinking about how you present yourself to that outside world. And I'm very happy to keep this community going and growing in ways that envelop your entire future.
And then I would say the same, and I've helped many people in terms of job applications and writing and so on, and as well as tenure and promotion strategies. And so I would be happy to work with any of you. And I think that's it.
Questions?
I think it's great that the SAA is developing some criteria. That's super. Yeah. I think they're hitting the buttons that we need to hit.
Yeah, they're trying.
Your presentation had a lot of really great links in there. Is that going to be posted?
Yes, all of the slides are.
Yeah, we'll figure out a way to get them posted.
Yeah,
I think you should share them on paper.
Paper only, yes.
Play tablet, perhaps?
Yes.
For the SAI task force, is there a place we can go and actually review them?
Not yet, but there should be.
Okay.
There should be.
Are they going to have a process of open review?
Yeah, and that's my understanding. Luann Wansnyder is chair of the task force. And yeah, that my understanding is yes. I delayed submitting comments, as I said, and so this next week she's putting the final version together to post. Yeah.
I have a question that might be a little bit off topic, but with regards to peer review in publishing, could you give some advice on how to deal with reviewers that completely disagree with each other about your work?
Happens all the time. Okay, so this part of this is it's the job of a good editor to negotiate that. It really shouldn't be your job. I mean, you can work with the editor about it. So let's say it's a journal editor. And sometimes it happens, you get wildly different reviews. I was editor of American Antiquity for 4 years, and I have to say that some reviews I actually threw out. The authors never saw them. If they had ad hominem attacks in them, if they were just vicious, I just, put them on a blacklist and I threw out the review. But that doesn't happen so much anymore. There are a lot of really nasty reviews. And I think people are getting tired of reviewing. You don't get anything for it, other than the fact that you feel if you don't review something, then maybe your next article is not going to happen so much. And so it's a guilt thing. And so people have tended to become nastier and nastier. And I will say, my experiences, both just personally and watching students, is that women get nastier reviews than men, and much more personal, vicious sort of things, and I'm chair of another SAA task force that's just finishing its work now, where there was this real disconnect. It's called the Task Force on Gender Disparities in Archaeological Research Grant Submissions, and we're just finishing that report as well. And there are some real, and some of you may have been interviewed by us, and so there are some issues there too. But you have to try. What people tell you is take each review and try to figure out what they actually are opposed to for. And if you see it conflicting, you have to go to the editor and say, look, here's what I think. This person says this person says the opposite. Which way do you want me to go? Don't try to figure it out yourself. You can't, because you don't know who those people are. And so you really can't make that evaluation.
So following on that, do you think with those sorts of gender
Mhm,
imbalances and reviews that we should advocate for double-blind reviews?
Well, that's one possible solution, although you can almost, as archaeology is too small, you can almost always figure out who it is. And that's the problem there.
One of the, and I don't have a strong opinion on this myself, but one of the arguments I've heard against the double-blind peer review is that it's sort of cloaking the people who are being biased. And so it's making us less able to collect the data on what those biases are and where they come into play.
Well, I'm just talking about the experience of the reviewer versus the person being reviewed.
Mhm.
And so the editor knows who those people, the
Right.
players are.
Right.
You can collect that data.
But they rarely call them on it, from what I understand.
That is
For
true.
women getting stronger reviews and things.
Uh-huh.
So I, again, don't have particularly strong opinions for a variety of reasons, but that kind of making me out in the open is when it's fine.
And yes, Eric.
I
I was just going to say one more thing. That reminds me, I'm chair of a third SAA task force, and that is on selecting the new editor of American Antiquity. So if you have somebody who you think would make a great editor, let me know.
Just about peer review, there have been also lots of experiments in open peer review where people sign their peer reviews. And that sometimes works, but again, it doesn't if there's still an underlying power dynamic, there's an underlying power dynamic, and no matter what system of peer review that you're going to put into place, those are always going to enter into how review actually unfolds. So it's so you have this more meta issue that's sort of structural stuff that's, you can't just sort of set one peer review system up and hope that it'll fix it, because it won't.
Well, there's one journal in particular that I've reviewed for that I'm very uncomfortable with. They have, who's written the article, but they don't know who you are. But you write your review. But then what bothers me about this particular journal is there's a separate box for you to give other comments to the editor that the author never sees. And I find that especially problematic.
Yeah, but that happens, I think, all the time with the cover email or.
Doesn't happen all the time.
Well, it happens in some cases where there'll be this extra commentary
Yeah.
saying, oh,
'Cause I have to
gee,
say-
this is what's going on and this is what I really think. but I'm gonna write it this way for
Yeah.
this
I have to
author.
say that I really never, I didn't see it when I was editor of American Antiquity.
Yeah.
And AAA papers are a different entity, so that's a little bit different. Sean?
I've participated in a couple of open peer review
Mhm.
processes now, and each one has been slightly different, but they've all been quite interesting, mostly because the dynamic of putting your name to what you're saying kind of forces people to dial down their ass foolishness.
It's true.
To a degree.
And there are people who always sign their peer reviews.
Right, right, and I think when they choose to not be anonymous, it's an invitation for a conversation. And I've seen that develop among authors and often junior scholars and senior scholars, and it sets up, so that's the upside of it. That there's the power imbalance that might be going on, but then it's a way of becoming much more collegial.
Yeah, Anne and then Ethan.
Yeah, I think there's also the case that we need to include this in professionalization so that students, as part of our training processes or programs, need to be exposed to review processes. So one of the things that I do, for example, is share reviews, including some of the nasty ones and the productive ones, and we look at what a review looks like. And
Yeah, it's a great idea.
One of the principles that we try to convey is the notion, if you write a review, set it aside. If you can't put your name on it, there are good reasons why sometimes you want to remain anonymous. But if you can't put your name, if you feel like you couldn't put your name on it, you need to rewrite that review, even if you're going to submit it anonymously. So I think part of it is professionalization and the idea that there may be assholes out there, but you're not going to be one of them, and not perpetuate that system.
That's a great point. Ethan?
So one of the interesting, I think Eric was talking about peer review systems, and so Sean and Cindy was talking about peer review. Is there's been some really interesting examples, both on the sort of the journal level and the edit volume level, as well as the book level, and many of them have been sort of high-profile celebrations of the success of open peer review, or at least as an experiment. I think for the most part, the thing that people forget, and this isn't true for all of them, a gradient here, is everyone who has participated in those experiments have bought into the idea of open peer review already, right? So they are, mostly they're not resistant to it. They believe in this. They're doing this because of the value, and as such, there is a decreased chance of them being assholes. I mean, they're probably not assholes to begin with. So I think that we have to be sort of mindful of celebrating these successes and some really good publications and really high-profile things of open peer review as the success of open peer review. It is just as much as the success of the community of individuals who are doing the open peer review as well. But having said that, it's also the responsibility of the editor or the individual who is managing it to mitigate the process. In an open peer review, you have to be that person in charge has to be much more present and ensuring that the issues of power and speaking truth to power and the imbalances are not amplified, and there's also not the opportunity for retribution for a bad review or something like that.
I will say one thing that hasn't come up, and that is for the archaeological papers of the AAA, I have to get a reviewer for the whole volume. It's usually 10 to 12 papers. And we pay people to review. And we get much more thoughtful reviews, I have to say, than I ever did otherwise. That people are, if they're getting paid for it, they are much more careful, much more thoughtful. So,
The experiences from the book publishing arena with peer review, when you have those split reviews, many times the editor will go back for a third review to get another sense of that. They'll also talk to the authors and ask them, are there any other considerations that when they read the review and what to think about. Because of how we operated, we weren't really able to, the reviews that may have been mean-spirited were not able just to be put aside. They were always just part and kind of went with. But editors always know, they worked with a lot of different hundreds and hundreds and thousands of reviewers. So they're more in tune with when something is just an academic, an intellectual argument versus a personal argument. We also, at that time, we would also ask authors, who should we not send a review
Right.
to?
And you have the right to do that for
Yeah.
any journal article.
Absolutely.
You can't have a list of 50 people.
One time I did.
You can't do that.
Almost
You could do
nobody.
like 2, 3 at the
Right,
most.
right. But and there may be things that the editors may not really know about. The other thing I know that this is really, and you've seen this, that there's a small group of reviewers on a particular topic. What I also found was the flip, though, where people were so absolutely certain who that reviewer
Right.
was.
And it wasn't.
And it wasn't. And then it was this sense of, I don't want you out there saying these things about this person who had nothing to do with it. It may have been a negative review. So just be aware that even though you're so dead certain when you get a review who is the reviewer, you really may not.
You're probably wrong.
So to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But,
I wanted to go back to the promotion and tenure and specifically the SAA task force. I think this is a wonderful thing that the SAA, as one of the major organizations for archaeology, is doing for the archaeological community. And so, speaking from a university that's like MSU, a research one, and so it's very clear at the university level what the criteria are for promotion and tenure, and it is very traditional, peer-reviewed journal articles, books. It's documents that can have citation indices, sometimes museum exhibits, and certainly some departments have, like English and art and design, have gotten things, but I know that it's very clear, and so it's hard at the department level or the college level to argue for someone who is doing something outside of that. Now, digital thing, I think at LSU is starting, it has started to change, but some of those other things that are in the task force about the process of creating the knowledge, about the data itself, about reports, and other documents that take time, and where are they? Are they the things that clearly they are a product? So those things I know do not count.
That's right.
Absolutely do not count, and so I do not encourage, and it's poor to encourage untenured faculty to focus on those things. But if the SAA, since the SAA is taking the lead, our department, our university, or our department say, look at these.
And that's the point of this.
And
That's the
so
point of doing it.
It's really transformational. That's one of those big words, I think.
Yeah, no, and that's the point of doing these things. And many other professional societies have done this. And we've looked at, the task force has looked at probably, 10 of them, with that societies that have done similar things. And we've had to look at like 10 of them because what we do doesn't quite fit in a lot of the boxes. And so it does make a difference, we hope. We'll see.
Along those lines, if I can just send back from our perspective at the MLA one piece of advice your way, and this is something that SAA would probably be more natively inclined to do than we would, is to track the impact of this once you release it, to have everybody who uses it, every department who picks up these guidelines, every case that goes through, report back those case studies to you so that you can see how tenure guidelines are changing out there based on this policy.
Yeah, that's a great point, which I will make explicit as I send that back. That's a great point to make. Yeah, because otherwise,
Who knows?
Yeah.
Right, do these things have an effect,
That's
a
right.
policy drops in the forest.
That's right. And there are lots of policies. And when somebody changes, then the policy changes. And so, yes, that is very important. Okay, I think we're done.
Thank you very much. All right, that's it for our streaming. So what we're going to do is before it gets